Welcome to episode 206 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is John Parker, the CEO of Kickback Soccer Media. John is clear. Soccer in the US is not an up-and-coming sport anymore. In this episode, you can expect to learn why the media narrative around soccer is often wrong, the building up to the Men's World Cup, the Beckham rule, the legacy after World Cup 2026, and much more. John Parker, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
Thanks, Marcus. Very excited to be here and, as always, to talk soccer in the US.
It's great to have you on the show. Soccer is an up-and-coming sport in the US, I guess you can say. You have worked in this field now for 15 plus years, something like that. But first, you are the CEO of Kickback Soccer Media. So can you talk a little bit about this company and your role there?
Absolutely. And one thing I would say is, people have been saying soccer is up and coming in the US since 1980s, 1990s, before the last World Cup, the 94 World Cup in the US. And one thing that I like to do is kind of correct them. The soccer is massive in the US. There's an estimated 80 million plus fans already of soccer in the US. The complexity of soccer in the US is its stratification. The fact that there's so many leagues, there's so many options, there are people from so many different countries that it isn't necessarily centralized the way it is in the UK, for example, with the Premier League and the English national team. In the US, what we have already is one of the three biggest sports, and you're in the largest country for sports entertainment already in the world. And this moment is really massive. So I always like to jump in because, I've heard quite a bit over the past 20 years from people in the sports industry in the US who would say, I keep on hearing that soccer's the next sport. And I've been hearing that for decades. Well, it's already arrived. Now it's a question of, is it going to be the sport rather than a big sport? Because it very much already is a massive, massive sport in the US. But to that end, I think that's a good segue a little bit on Kickback Soccer Media. So as you mentioned, Marcus, I've spent 15 years, my entire career in soccer. That's actually a little bit of an anomaly because when I was 13, 14, I was the first generation that could watch soccer on TV regularly. We first started getting international sports channels in the US to regular households around the country. Similarly, I was able to log onto the internet and get onto soccer forums and follow along with my favorite teams and get the news that wasn't delivered to me via the American newspaper or the magazine that I could purchase off the magazine stand. So that has allowed me to be kind of in this first real foray of people who grew up with the sport and were able to fall in love with the sport as a child to get into the industry and work their career in the thing that they're so passionate about. And I've been fortunate enough to be joined with a lot of people like me, kind of this first generation of sorts of people who've spent their entire career in sports looking to build something that can be a legacy for what they've already accomplished and what they want to accomplish, and a legacy for all the other people like us who are looking to carve a livelihood in the sport that they love, in the field that they love, in a space that, while I mentioned there are so many fans, there hasn't necessarily been a legacy media company. There hasn't been a platform for those fans, specifically for those people who work in the industry and want to be here 20 years from now, who want to be a part of the community well after 26 is over and a little bit of the circus is left as well.
That's really interesting. And as we said, okay, it's not an up-and-coming sport. It's already here, but it's a lot of interesting things on the horizon. The World Cup is coming. So how do you feel like currently the state of soccer in the US and just also, looking forward to the World Cup?
So there's mostly positives, but there are a few things that I myself, a lot of my colleagues have our eye on. So we recently launched, as I mentioned, for this purpose of building something that's a legacy for what comes after the World Cup. And part of the reason we're doing that is what we do think is being missed right now is something that is going to be here after 26. So what we have in the US at the moment is this massive, massive sport, tons of financial investment around the sport, but in a way that ends up really kind of extracting and taking it out of the country afterwards. So there's a lot of talk about all World Cups, about the legacy. There's various nonprofits that are formed. There's various organizations that supposedly are supposed to keep some of the money, the billions of dollars that are going to be invested in the sport in the country so that we can have a tail, build from the momentum, from the fandom, from the passion, and build something that makes the soccer community stronger afterwards. That is what we do think is missing right now. FIFA obviously is this behemoth that comes in, and at this point, it kind of swallows things whole. It has opened its offices in the US in order to operate the 26th World Cup. In the past, the World Cup, including 1994, was operated by the local organizing committee. So it was actually pockets of American groups that would operate the host cities, sell the sponsorships. There's still host city committees, but they aren't as empowered as they used to be. So in 94, those local organizing committees, they really became the foundation for the stakeholders, the entrepreneurs, the people who now really kind of run soccer in the US. Whereas FIFA is a lot more involved with their Miami office and staffing up really the World Cup itself in the US. So to that end, there's this massive thing, but the big question that kind of is at the front of my mind, at the front of a lot of people's mind in the industry right now is, all right, there's going to be billions of dollars spent on it. There's going to be hundreds of millions of Americans following it. There's going to be billions of people around the world following it, obviously. It's going to be the biggest entertainment event of all time. But what's going to come after? And that, I think, that legacy is something that everybody, at least in this country, who cares about the sport and cares about its future, it's something we need to be thinking about every day.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point and a good segue into youth development and the evolution to, build from the ground up. So how do you see that in terms of academies and, in US, you have the school system, with the college sports and all of that. That's huge. So, how can all of this play into grow soccer sustainably?
So I actually have a background in youth development, and I would say the part of the sport that I personally am most passionate about kind of around the pitch is the youth development system. I actually had the fortune to work with what I would say is the best academy in the US, Philadelphia Union. They had 7 national teamers in the last US camp for Gold Cup. And the reason that it's the best academy is, one, the investor who had the vision for it, a man named Richie Graham, built a school, built a private school that was directly associated where all of the Union Academy players attended the school during the day and then trained in the morning and the afternoon with the Union. Understanding exactly what you mentioned, there is this idiosyncrasy, which is a positive one, of education in the US and the importance of earning a college degree and potentially getting what's a little bit less of a positive idiosyncrasy of the American education system, getting the scholarship because college is so expensive. Now, that used to be the fundamental component of youth development in the US, call it 10, 15 years ago. We still haven't fully professionalized the women's side, which we can have a whole conversation about NWSL's new rules about incorporating young players. But on the men's side, we have definitely crossed the threshold where pretty much any elite youth soccer player is first going to focus on going pro. And what we have now with the Academy to Pro system, with MLS Next Pro with MLS, USL, the lower leagues have academy systems now as well. And you can turn on USL any weekend, see 16, 17-year-olds from their academies playing. What we have now is a fundamentally different thing than what we had 5 years ago, and a completely different outlook from where we were just 18 years ago when we first allowed players to come from the academy to the pros in MLS when they changed the rules. And as you can imagine, I'm sure many of your listeners understand, being more endemic in the space, it is an incredibly long process to develop a professional academy system, because by the time you get around to properly executing at the U8, U9, U10 level, you've got to wait 20 years to see the fruit of your labor. So we're definitely in that, call it like 25 to 30 year process of professionalizing our academies. And we've started to see the fruit of that labor in the past 10 years, but we still have another 15 years until we see kind of the full process play out and see the quality of the players come through from the now highly professional standards that MLS academies adhere to the incorporation of youth development at the lower levels, to the incorporation of best practices throughout kind of the amateur academies in the US. All of that is coming to the fore now. But we always, as a nation, will struggle with certain things. Just the main one being travel. Like it's such a massive country, and people talk about development here. I think they forget like how expensive plane tickets are, and to get good competition, you have to get on a plane. So I would say, in summary, we're in a really good spot right now. There will always be challenges. The aforementioned education system, something that we can really utilize to our benefit because of the strength of the collegiate system here, if we find the right ways to associate player development with education. But secondly, there are always going to be difficulties, and the main one being just the sheer insane size and scale of this country.
We talked about legacy and after now World Cup 26, and what are some other things that you hope that, this will do for soccer in the US?
So we are very focused on how do we bring new fans in the sport. But one thing that we think is very crucial to do across our ecosystem of shows, we have 5 podcasts a week. We have 3 different media properties with social channels on Blue Sky, where we have partnership, and on Instagram. We have 1 newsletter and some more coming. But across all of those platforms, we are striving to be a more positive voice for soccer in the US. And this isn't necessarily just soccer, but I think part of the legacy, what we need is a more positive discourse around the sport. There was a big controversy last week. The biggest American star, Christian Pulisic, has a documentary on one of the streaming services in the US, Paramount Plus, and he and one of the other players, Tim Weah, have been a part of a larger discourse with a lot of former US men's national teamers in the media who have been complaining weekly about the commitment of the national team and how hard they're playing and how they're playing. But that's been a larger part of what's been kind of toxic discourse in the media in the US. And that kind of, engagement bait, that kind of cheap attempt to try to get clicks versus trying to create, doing the hard work, frankly, the hard work of creating interesting discourse that will bring fans in and keep them in, I think is another thing we need from the next year. Because after 26, there's going to be another 100 million plus people who don't normally follow soccer in the US who will follow the World Cup. And the question will be, how do you keep them in? And we are fundamentally of the belief that you cannot keep them in through these kind of, what at this point is kind of the classic media tactic of engagement bait and rage clicks. We have to create a discourse and create a community and create content that is positive and makes people want to remain, become fans of the sport. So that's another thing and it's not just soccer, it's kind of the whole media landscape to an extent, but we are fundamentally of the belief that we need a more positive discourse as a legacy coming out in 26.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Also, how important do you think that the US national team's performance in the World Cup will play in? Because historically, like the women has done exceptionally well, while on the men's side, not so much.
Yeah, I get in trouble a bit when I remind people from other countries we have 4 World Cups, which makes us the second most successful national team on the planet. And something worth discussing when we discuss stuff like youth development is we have historically been the best developer of female talent. And part of that is because of the collegiate system. It's the men's side where we have not historically been as successful. And to that end, we are a good team. Our expectations have definitely lifted. I feel like a lot of people are a little bit newer to the sport who don't remember the fact that, being a top 20 team in the world was not something that we just, woke up expecting, but it is something we expect now. And there's this expectation that we take this next leap when it's, there's a lot of quality out in the world at the moment. Obviously a big run, a quarterfinal run, which would match our best ever performance from 2002 would be massive, absolutely massive. There's no saying otherwise. There's the benefit of playing at home. There always has been. Plenty of countries have been like us going into the World Cup, a little wary of our performances. But once you become the host country, the benefits are statistically clear. I believe South Africa might be the only host country ever not to qualify from the group until Qatar in 2022. So it would be massive. Us not getting through the group would be, I think, it'd be something it'd take us a very long time to overcome. But as long as we get through the group, frankly, and don't embarrass ourselves, I think it still will be a transformative World Cup. And then it's just the upside of, can we get to the quarterfinals? Can we win a big match against, call it like a traditional power in soccer, and get into the the average Joe's home in the US and have them experience that thrill, that exhilaration of watching the US win a massive match, that could change the course of our history as a soccer nation. Absolutely. Honestly, that's just us beating the Netherlands or beating Portugal or beating one of the traditional powers in the round of 32, the round of 16. To me, that's the whole game. Just getting one of those victories.
Yeah. No, so you mentioned also 100 million people that will watch it, maybe not for the first time, but will follow it more than they usually do. But compared to other, call them American sports, the setup or like the structure of soccer is a little bit different. 2 halves with 45 minutes. It's not so many breaks. That's something I noticed, going to US to watch sports is, a lot of more breaks, commercial breaks, people go in and out a little bit more. So how do you think that the, call it structure of the sport works in the US?
So it's interesting. What maybe used to hamper the sport has become one of its biggest positives just in terms of its structure. When you look at the statistics of ages 2 to 21 in the US, soccer is by far and away the second most popular sport. And when you think of the attention span that people have now in the digital world, soccer is constructed perfectly. It's 2 hours, there are very few breaks, and you can easily take down a goal, and a goal plays on any social media platform. It plays out of context at any point. Soccer is perfectly digitized in that sense. Very consumable, snackable, whatever cliche term you want to use from the media space right now. In addition, the monetization of sports used to be an ad model, right? But now it's a streaming model. So now it's less important that you have these ad breaks. Obviously, that if you're the NFL and you have 150 million people watching every week, you can sell plenty of ads. But for the most part, the monetization strategy is focused around streaming, and the lack of breaks that you get in football and basketball and baseball no longer hampers the monetization model for soccer. So to that end, I think soccer is in so many ways is the modern sport. It's also the traditional sport, and that says something about just the sport being the sport. But I think that complaint that you may have gotten from the CBSs and the NBCs in 2001, it's the opposite now, and CBSs have Champions League, and it's the most important media rights that they hold.
And you mentioned like these were like the younger fan base that is the second most famous sport, and otherwise you're talking about you're having tailgates and you're having different events around different sport. Do you think that with the up and coming generation, with the younger generation, that they are leaning more towards soccer than maybe other sports?
It's not only clearly statistically true, there's so many studies that have made it very obvious that soccer is going to be one of the two sports. It already is with younger generations. It's what they play. It's what they follow. It's what they look at on their phones. It's the jerseys that they wear. I live in New York, and it seems like 1/3 of the kids in New York wear a soccer jersey every day. It's so clear that has been passed on. And part of the reason that, again, I'll reference the story I said at the beginning about my age and growing up with soccer. I was the first generation. So take about like age 40 or so, first generation grew up with soccer. We're now having kids. This generation is the first generation to grow up with all their parents following soccer. So we've kind of aged into this process where soccer is very established. My parents had never watched a game until I played, but the kids of my generation, they grew up with their parents having played, watching the sports in the morning, giving them a team to follow as well. So it just, even if we did nothing else, just by pure timelines, we're going to have soccer be a top 2, top 3 sport in the country.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And we talked a little bit about before, like strategies you mentioned, to changing, the communication around soccer and not just having the rage bait, clickbait type of, strategy. What are some other strategies you think to engage new fans or more fans?
So this speaks a little bit to me as a media consumer, but I firmly believe in creating content from people who love something. So letting people join into a conversation with people who are talking about something that they deeply care about. So we have a full funnel approach to our shows and our social content that kind of creates content specifically for avid fans and then creates content for emerging and new fans as well. But across all of it, what is unified and uniform is all the people who are creating the content, whether it's the person posting on social, it's the talent on our shows. Everyone deeply cares about the sport in the US. And to that end, the way they speak about it, well, one, they're actually watching the games. That's very important as well. You have to watch the games, you have to follow what's happening in the sport. But the way they communicate about it, it creates its own virality. It's virality of the passion and joy that they clearly harbor for the sport. Where even when we're talking about things that have nothing to do with soccer, kind of the enjoyment we have doing it, we believe is contagious. And whether, again, it's the written word and newsletter or it's one of our podcasts, we believe in bringing people to the fore who truly care and are passionate, that's going to win out versus, bringing people, maybe they're A-listers and they're getting a really, really big check and that's why they're doing it.
How important do you think that, for example, Messi, comes to play in the US, someone who is like a huge name and still on top of his game? Because I felt like a couple of years ago when Beckham went over, I felt at least, maybe that's a little bit negative to say, but like they went to MLS to like the end of their career. Like maybe they were done in Europe and they played a final year in US. And now it feels like the players coming over are still top of their game.
Yeah, that was a period when we changed the salary rules to allow, actually the nickname was the Beckham rule. They started to allow one player to be off the salary books at MLS. And it started with Beckham, and then we had some other great players like Guadalupe Blanco come, but yes, they were largely older. Beckham's legacy here is amazing. Not only is he part of the reason, maybe the main reason Messi's here now, but he's the reason that we have all these new soccer stadiums. When he came in 2007, I believe we may have had two kind of very erector sets soccer stadiums in the US. But he validated the attendance model, he validated the business, and owners across the country started building these amazing stadiums that we have now in pretty much every Major League Soccer market. But yes, it's different now in multiple ways. One, obviously, MLS is investing a lot more money. So we have everything from, the star 19-year-old Argentines that we bring into the star 19-year-old Americans who come through our academies. And then we have Messi. LAFC just signed Son from Tottenham, who very much has legs left. Rodrigo de Paul joined Inter Miami as well, who's really in the prime of his career. And frankly, the smarter teams are going and buying the top 25-year-old in Belgium every year, realizing that the Bundesliga, Serie A, et cetera, they're only really looking for players under 22 to invest in. And MLS will go take some of the top players in Europe and some of the top players in South America. I think we saw at the Club World Cup a little bit this summer that the world's getting a little bit flatter. What I think was the inherent thought that Europe was far above everyone else was maybe disbanded a bit by the performance, especially of the Brazilian teams and how good Brazil is right now. But I think the rest of the world outside the top, call it 10 to 15 super clubs, are catching up with the rest of Europe. And I think there will be a point where the world gets a little bit flatter. And yes, Real Madrid will always be Real Madrid. But if you're going to get paid more to play in Miami and the quality of play is really good, do you really want to go to Bournemouth? Obviously, the experience living in Miami is a little bit more exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe, Champions League along the road, do you see like MLS teams competing there in a couple of years?
The travel's just so difficult, right? I don't think we're going to have a choice anyways. It sounds like FIFA is going to push Club World Cup to be every other year. I'm sure there will be plenty of legal battles and a lot of hair pulling, but FIFA has seemingly got whatever they wanted whenever they want it. So Occam's razor probably says bet on FIFA. So if we end up with a Club World Cup every other year, that I think can be a little bit of a stand-in to ensure that we get that international competition. I think what would be more exciting here is bringing the Americas together. We share so much culturally as a soccer nation. A lot of people like to associate us with England, but we're probably more associated with Latin America. We obviously have the same time zone, so it makes it easier to watch. And we share a lot of the same players. So to that end, I would love personally to see what we're doing with Leagues Cup, what we're doing with Mexico, finding a way to tap into Copa Libertadores, have a championship between CONCACAF and CONMEBOL. I think that could be a good stand-in on top of the Club World Cup, which FIFA will do what they do.
So speaking about the future, what are some predictions that you have for the future of US soccer?
Well, one big one that's not really, I think everybody knows it, but we're talking about 26 right now. In 5 years, maybe I'll be back and we'll be talking about 2031, the Women's World Cup in the US. Obviously, women's soccer here is already very big. The league is really booming in many ways. The quality of play is awesome. The national team hopefully will, maybe one prediction is we'll take the World Cup next year. Well, not next year, quite year and a half from now in Brazil. And women's soccer will just continue to explode here. The quality is so good. Obviously, it's where we thrive as a nation on the development side. And the owners are now getting to a point where they can build their own stadiums, build their own training grounds, and truly invest in a way that it looks more like MLS and less like a league that maybe had an existential threat of shutting down, which women's leagues have historically done in the US. So that's one big part of our future as Soccer Nation. The other big part is taking the infrastructure we built on the player side in the front offices that we've really taken great strides with, and then similarly replicating it on, call it the business, community, culture, media side. So that's one thing. Obviously, it's a bet I am making personally, but the bet that with so many fans, with so much investment in the sport off the pitch needs that same thriving community. It needs that same level of investment as what we get on the pitch. So that's the other thing that I foresee is all of the local bloggers who are doing it for fun and spending all this time, pretty much working for free. All of these people who've invested so much in the sport for years and years and years, more and more we'll be able to see people turn that into their career. And that I think and I hope is a huge part of the 2026 World Cup is that we're going to see soccer become not just the amazing stadium and experience that you have on Saturday with your NWSL or local MLS team, but something that you then experience once you leave the stadium the rest of the week, whether it be at an amazing soccer bar locally, via a media company like Kickback Soccer Media, through product, whatever it may be, that soccer becomes a 360 experience in the US.
Yeah, I like that. It's interesting times ahead, to say the least.
Absolutely.
I also interested in your background. You have hinted a little bit. You've been 15 years in soccer. How did you get into this sport in the first place? And I know you've been part of several companies, been co-founder of other companies as well. So a little bit how you got into the sport and your career journey up until this point.
So I got in the sport because I was finding any way to get a job in the sport, which is difficult 15 years ago. It was pretty much you work for a local club. Maybe you're lucky enough to get a job with Major League Soccer or US Soccer, and that's pretty much it. And I was fortunate enough to work with an amazing person in my hometown of Atlanta, kind of third party of Adidas Soccer, that I met someone who met someone. And that is the story that you hear most from people who are not former players getting into soccer or getting into sports in general in the US. You have to get a little lucky, and you have to keep on trying and just networking until finally you break in. Once you break in, then obviously you work from, you grow based upon your capabilities and your passion. Working in soccer in the US still is very much you work for a club, you work for the federation, you work for a league, or you might need to build something. So that has been what I've been involved with throughout my career, is building new soccer properties, new companies. One with the co-owner of Philadelphia Union, I would say the best MLS club. I'm a little biased, working primarily on his investment in the youth academy, which has been transformative not only for the union itself, but for soccer in the US. The build out of a one-of-a-kind private school that is associated with the academy, bringing in Ernie Stewart, who is our sporting director, is now sporting director at PSV, was previously sporting director at US Soccer. Awesome academy director at the time, a guy named Tommy Wilson, who was at Rangers previously, and built out what, really from scratch, what became the best development environment in North America. So seeing that was really being a part of that was really one of the things I'm most proud about in my career because of the impact it's had on the country. But that has been built, and people much, much better at development than me are working from strength to strength in Philadelphia right now. People across the world might know actually one of our players, Kevin Sullivan, who's a 15-year-old who debuted for the Union of 14, has already been purchased by Manchester City. That's the type of quality that's been developed out of that academy. And from there, worked on a a platform called Soccer Champions Tour as the GM the past 2 years, which is co-owned by Real Madrid and FC Barcelona and AC Milan, which had amazing success. We had El Clasico the past 2 years in the US. I think we did about 400,000+ attendees per year over 6 to 8 matches, sold out NFL stadiums across the country. But I like to tell the story of, there was a Champions League game. I guess it was maybe a year and a half ago. In many ways, I'm working for Real Madrid, the most famous sports team in the world. And instead of watching Real Madrid in a knockout qualifier, I was watching the Philadelphia Union reserve team play a match that maybe 30 people who weren't parents of the players were watching across the country. And that really drove home that my passion, Real Madrid's fine. They're always going to be fine. They don't need me. My passion was for the sport here and doing something that really has a legacy here. I care more about what comes out of that Union 2 game than comes out of that Real Madrid game. So that was really the part of why I knew I needed to get back into the domestic sport. And then through conversations with colleagues and people who are working throughout soccer in the US, asking who's doing something important in the space, the resounding answer was no one. Let me know when you find them. And then just realized that we had to do it ourselves. So able to collaborate with a team of 15+ amazing people who are really passionate about the future of the sport here, and do it in a way that we control our destiny too. We right now are not beholden to kind of outside priorities. Our priority is to build something sustainable and big, something that will, again, as I mentioned, when the circus gets teared down, we're going to be standing, and we'll be standing on top.
Yeah, that story says a lot, right? That, where your passion lies.
Yeah, exactly.
But in these 15 years, has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Of course. The thing that's most complicated, I'm sure everybody has this experience, and it's not unique to soccer in the US, but we're in an emerging industry. So even just if you're an emerging industry, inevitably there are platforms that see the opportunity and they come in, but then interest vacillates and the investment doesn't pay out quick enough for the investor. So what you're often confronted by is the confidence in the future of soccer in the US. So wherever you work, it might be what someone really cares about for a month, and then a CEO or an investor, their focus shifts, a month later. And there you are standing thinking you were working on the project that was most important to everyone involved, and all of a sudden no one cares anymore. And that has been the thing that I've tried to navigate the most, is that vacillating interest, that while the bedrock of soccer in the US, the fandom, continues to grow, sometimes there can be, very short attention spans around these tentpole moments where other people get very interested at the beginning of a tournament, but by the time soccer's out of the news, they've completely, that they pulled out of a project. And that's something that I'm trying to de-risk right now in terms of that point I've made of trying to control my own destiny, control our destiny with my co-founders and my partners, because of that vacillating interest, where I know everyone in the US right now is focused on soccer, and they will be through 26. But not everybody's going to be focused come September 2026. And not being able to control your destiny to an extent means that for all the passion, all the work you can put into something, all of the capability you might have to pull it out, it doesn't mean that you'll succeed, because you're beholden to someone else's whims.
So you have that more freedom when you have more to say about the company.
Right, where we can make the decisions on investments and have the, I'd almost call it the stubbornness to stick through with them, to make those decisions, to commit to them for a year plus in order to actually see the returns. Whereas plenty of people have made these very short-term investments in soccer, and then after a couple of months, maybe pickleball becomes the thing that the investor is interested in. Or maybe, the CEO wants to get back to football because the returns are very clear in football. So to that end, I think it's for emerging industries, the people who work in the industry need to push through and not be fully beholden to outside forces who might not have the vision or the commitment to the industry to see through the important projects the industry needs.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, of course, that's going to be on everyone's lips during next summer, but what happens in the fall?
Exactly. And the truth is, there are going to be some amazing people who are out of jobs, and there are going to be some amazing projects that are going to be cast to the side. Because as much as everybody might say they're into soccer forever right now, the truth is they're going to return to their board with some really good numbers come September 2026. And a lot of people then are going to move on to LA 28. And they're going to move back to the NFL because there will never be another World Cup like this, or at least not for 30 years, right? There's never going to be a more profitable opportunity in soccer in the US than what happens for the next year. If you don't understand that the baseline is going to continue to increase as well, you might pull out because it's not going to be as big as it is that summer. We're committed to that baseline. We're looking at the baseline and the increase in the baseline, and that's what we're pegging our future on.
Interesting. I like to end on a networking question. Who from your network do you think would be a good guest on this podcast?
Interesting. Well, one would be my former boss, Richie Graham, who is the co-owner of the Union and owner of For Soccer, which is a media marketing agency in soccer in the US. So that would be one. I also, there's some people I love who are more on the player side. Like our former academy director is now the technical director of the Charlotte MLS team, Tommy Wilson. I referenced him. Some of the Union guys are great, like the academy director of the Philadelphia Union, John Shear. He was director of scouting at the Union. So he's doing some awesome things in Philadelphia as well. So if you're going more player side, that's where I'd go. Yeah, that'd be my list.
Those are great names. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
John, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
Marcus, thank you very much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the follow or subscribe button on your podcast app so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com, connect with me on LinkedIn, or follow the podcast on Instagram, X, and Facebook @SportsM Podcast.